And yes, the updates have been done. Everything is ready to go. We were having internet connection problems, and for some reason, away we go. And welcome here, welcome there to Astrology Night at Soul Food Bookstore, SoulFood Coffeehouse here in Redmond, Washington. No rain. Oh my gosh. And let me just get a chart here because that's what's going to happen next. And we got some mileage to cover this evening. And let's see, that's an animate and that's a now. And okay, so this is it. Good evening. Good evening. Woo! And thanks for your patience. So sometimes astrology works too well. And as you may know, not only do we have a Mercury-Uranus conjunction going on right now. Let's see, they are within 41, just about 1 degree of orb. And of course, Mercury is everything communication-wise, and Uranus is everything technological and unexpected. And so we're not sure exactly what happened, but it wouldn't let us log on, and here we are. By the way, the other thing that is happening that is applying right now that probably adds to the, what's the right word? Confusion, which is a great word for what planet? Neptune. Neptune. And we have the moon right now at 29 degrees of Pisces, and Neptune at 29 degrees of Pisces. So we are in the midst of a moon reflecting the fuzziness and the lack of clarity of Neptune, which of course is a mixed blessing. You know, for those of you who know my work, you know that I'm a bit of an etymology geek. And that's etymology, not entomology, meaning that I'm more interested in words than in insects. But the word confusion is an interesting word because most of us don't want to be confused, because when you're confused, you don't know what's going on. There's a sense of uncertainty, a sense of lack of clarity, a sense of fuzziness, all of which are Neptune words. However, the word confusion actually means with fusion. Greek for like a conjunction, two things coming together as one. And fusion is when two things melt together. And so confusion really means with melting together. Now the problem with that is that we as human beings suffer from this. We suffer and we benefit from this thing called ego, which actually the ego's job is to create the illusion of separation so that we can survive. And so what happens is that if I'm Rick and you're all them, there's a boundary between self and other. Now that boundary is great as long as I'm navigating and negotiating my own stuff. But if I meet you and let's say I really like you, the boundary between you and me might become a little bit fuzzy. And of course we know that love is confusing because one loses the sense of self and the boundary between self and others dissipate. Spirituality is built upon the concept that ego gets in the way because it's part of the illusion of separateness from all that is. So it was Trungpa Chogyam Rinpoche, who was the founder of Naropa College Institute in Boulder, kind of a radical, crazy wisdom master, Lama from Tibet. And Chogyam Rinpoche said, enlightenment is the ego's greatest disappointment. It's a really good one. Enlightenment is the ego's enlightenment is the ego's greatest disappointment, because you can't take it with you. And it reminds me of this old Gary Larson cartoon of this husband and wife sitting in their kind of suburban living room, and the husband's reading his newspaper, his wife's sitting next to him, and he's peering out over the newspaper, looking through a picture window at the house across the street. And across the street, there's this other typical suburban house. And above it, there's like this whirlwind, almost like a tornado of energy. And in it is cars and boats and RVs and lawnmowers and cameras and VCRs, and all these things are just getting sucked up in this whirlwind. And the husband says to the wife, "Look, honey, George is taking it with him." You can't take it with you. The ego doesn't like losing its boundary. And in fact, therapy is really a process of coaching the ego into dissolve enough so it doesn't have the resistance that we all have when we're facing our internal shadows and our internal unconscious issues, that which is repressed, that which we don't even know about. And so the therapist can't just tell you the answer, because the ego goes, "Nope, that's not true. I'm not like that." That's the response that we have to Neptune normally. So this is like my favorite kind of astrology lesson, because it's not out of some textbook having to do with nothing at all. It has to do with what's going on right now this evening. And that is, as the moon lines up with Neptune, there is a bit of boundary dissolution combined with the unexpected Mercury lined up with Uranus. And so in my illusory egoic state, I thought I had it all together this evening. All right. Were any of you at NORWAC this weekend? I know, several of you I remember seeing there. NORWAC is the Northwest Astrology Conference, and this was my 34th NORWAC. And although I have this theory that my friends call Rick's theory of the overinflated importance of the present moment, which is just like whenever someone says, "Oh, this is the best," or "This is the worst," that's just this. The current moment's always more important than all the others. But this was the best NORWAC ever. It was a really good one. Did you guys do okay? Yeah. Who are some of your favorite lecturers that you heard? Well, aside from me, thank you. You get brownie points. Who else? Judith Hill. Yvonne Tarnas.
Oh, she was fabulous.
Yeah, Yvonne is brilliant, and she was a Pacific Northwester before she met Rick and moved down to San Francisco. Austin Kopic. Kara Sutherland. Jason. Yeah, Jason Holly's a great storyteller with attitude.
Diana
Rose Harper. Yeah. Colin is always great. Yeah, it was an amazing crew this year. I mean, they're all good, but for some reason this one had a buzz that was maybe Jupiter in Gemini, which is one of the things that we will be talking about this evening. So I'm still coming down from, when I go to something like that, I have postpartum blues, or as a postpartum depression. But a week from tonight, I'll be at another conference in New York at the Omega Institute. And for those of you online, anyone in the New York area, it's not too late to join us there. That'll be next weekend. And then the following weekend on Saturday afternoon, I'll be in Boston at the NCGR doing a workshop on relationships. And so anyone out there or listening who can attend either of those, there's still room. So the order of business tonight. All right, it's rare, but it has happened before where because I've been doing these astrology nights now on the first Friday night of the month, that means that I usually or always have my monthly forecast online previously. Now, I recorded my June forecast this afternoon, so it's still kind of like really fresh in my mind. But I'm not going to do the day by day here this evening because that will be up online by tomorrow, sometime tomorrow midday. Apparently we are back, and I'm sorry, guys. It's been do you know where we dropped off, Sam? Do you have any idea?
It was a little bit before talking about personal politics.
Okay, so I'm going to just pick up where I was before. And I apologize for the technical issues, but we are driving under the influence of Mercury-Uranus and the Moon and Neptune. So, as I was saying before, the cosmos chose to disrupt the communication flow. That's Mercury and Uranus. It's difficult to talk about what we need to talk about tonight without talking about politics. But I want to be clear here. Although I certainly, like I'm sure many of you, have strong opinions about everything, I'm not here to sell my opinions tonight. I'd be happy to do that in private conversation and discussing things, but that's not my purpose this evening. My purpose, though, is to point out how what's going on in the world is reflective of what's going on in the cosmos. That's what's important, and that's the picture that we want to understand, which then may inform or help us understand what we can do on a day-to-day basis based upon what seems to be going on out there, which is actually what is going on in here, because as Anais Nin wrote, we do not see things as they are, we see things as we are. And, you know, there's no such thing as the color green out there. It just happens to be, 500 or 600 trillion cycles per second that we can perceive and reflect. And therefore, we think there's green out there because we can reflect it with something that is resonant to that in our brain. And the same is true with any experience out there. It's invisible unless we can resonate with it. Now, the problem is that we have entered into a world that has encouraged such a high level of individuation that we are resonating in very different ways from one another. And therefore, two people can see the same thing and have an absolutely extremely bifurcated reaction to what they think is going on, because what they think is going on is based upon how they see what they're seeing, not what they are seeing. So this is kind of important to understand, but there's a few things specifically that are going on that are resonant to things that have been in development for a while, and in fact will be part of our picture for a long while to come. And yet we are in an extremely delicate and powerful period when it comes to these things. So, in particular, there are two issues, and of course there are many more than these two issues, but there are two things that are certainly standing out, kind of like screaming at us right now, or at least if anyone's paying attention. One is obviously the fact that yesterday, the 45th president of the United States became a convicted felon, regardless of what your politics are, regardless of whether you think the whole thing was a scam and a setup or whatever, or whether you think, wow, I can't believe this finally happened, justice has been done. And again, I think my position in all of this is will probably leak through in ways that are loud, but that's not my intention. My intention is simply to acknowledge that something has happened that has never happened before in the history of this country. We have not only a president who is now a convicted criminal, a convicted felon, but this person is running for office again. So let's just set that over there for a moment. And then at the same time, we have something going on that's never, double negative intended here, it's never not gone on, meaning that it is always going on, but for some reason, it's in our faces in a way that is even bigger than it might be for some of us personally. And I'm speaking of the catastrophe that has unfolded or is still unfolding in the Middle East, in the, I hate to even use these words, the Holy Land. Just think about that one for a minute. But that is also something that is extremely important as to what it is that's going on. And again, my goal here isn't necessarily to stir up antagonism, although if I do, and if you find what I say distasteful, well, this is my show, be quiet and move along. But again, it's my point here is not necessarily to make value judgments, even though that's what we as humans do. My point here is to try to understand this in a context of astrology. So what is it that I'm talking about? Well, first of all, some of these things are things that how many people here have not been to an astrology night before? Any of this? Okay. So some of these things are things that I've talked about on and off for months, for years, okay, for, this is embarrassing, decades. But I just want to do a couple of little review pieces, and a deeper dive can be found on a lot of these topics by looking at some of my older stuff, one of which is a talk that I gave on the history of the Saturn-Pluto cycle. I'll make sure that there's a link by tomorrow in the comments on this post that will remain on YouTube to that talk, because Saturn, most of us know that Saturn is the Sirius planet because it was the gateway between here and there. What do I mean by here and there? Well, I mean here, and there. Saturn is the gateway between life and death. Saturn is the gateway between life on Earth which is sometimes referred to philosophically as the profane, and the divine, the sacred, that which exists up in the heavens, the realm of human, the fallen being of humans, Lucifer, the angel who fell through the gates of Satan or Saturn into the three-dimensional world. Saturn is the planet of karma. It's you get what you deserve. And of course, I understand that there are some pretty significant religions that say that we were all born of original sin and therefore we all deserve eternal damnation. But nevertheless, Saturn was that significant. Saturn was, I say was because Saturn has changed a bit in light of the discovery of so much out beyond Saturn that we moderners have now incorporated into our understanding of what is real. It used to be, if it was real, it was three-dimensional, it was here, it was now. Even physics, as the hardest core of all hardcore sciences, physics only dealt with those things which were in the three-dimensional world. The realm of thought was not considered to be part of physics. And in fact, when you look at classical physics, whether it's the works of Galileo or Isaac Newton, these mechanical, rules of gravity and cause and effect and acceleration and motion, these are things that only impact the three-dimensional world of things. Incidentally, the correct word for that world is the mesocosm. And you've probably heard the word microcosm to describe those things at the subatomic realm, things that happen inside of an atom. And the macrocosm or cosmology, those things at the very grand and very large realm. But the mesocosm, meso is middle, micro small, macro large. The mesocosm is where we live. And it was until the early 20th century assumed that the laws of the universe were the laws of the mesocosm. And of course, without going into one of my favorite topics that I could, wax on for days, and some of you have actually been with me on long-term retreats where I have waxed on about some of these things for days. But it was discovered in the early part of the 20th century that the rules of the mesocosm were not the rules of the universe. And that was frightening to the scientists and the physicists of that time, who invented this thing called quantum physics to basically acknowledge the fact that the universe didn't follow the rules of what we thought the universe was. Now, what does this have to do with here and now? Well, Saturn, up until the discovery of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, was considered to be the limit of consciousness. We could not see anything that moved out beyond Saturn. Out beyond Saturn, there was just what was called the crystalline sphere of fixed stars. And so Saturn was considered to be the gateway through which the Greeks believed, and the Egyptians believed, that the soul basically came through the gates of Saturn, where it began to develop three-dimensionality, and that the soul kind of compressed and came through the gates of Saturn, then through Jupiter, and then through Mars, and then Venus, Mercury, the sun, the moon, and boom, here we are on Earth. Hi, Mom. And that was the process. And when we died, the soul actually went backwards through those same things. And once it passed through the gates of Saturn, it no longer existed. Saturn was finality. You get what you deserve. Hindus call it karma. Newton called it Newton's third law. For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. Saturn was that mechanical cause and effect thing that we now discover is a myth. And part of that shattering of that boundary of Saturn occurred in the late 18th century, when the planet Uranus was discovered by the use of an instrument called the telescope. Now, I know some of you have heard me say this before, but again, the etymological part of me wants to remind us that tele is Greek for far, and scope or scopus is Greek for seeing or having a perspective on. A telescope is to see things that are far away. A microscope is to see things that are micro or tiny. A horoscope, horo is Greek for hour, is a technology or a tool that allows us to see the hour, a view of the hour. That's what a horoscope is. So when Uranus was discovered in the late 1700s, it shattered Saturn's rule over the definitive, what you see is what you get world. And Saturn takes about 30 years, 29 and a half years to go around the sun once. And of course, it's not lost on us that it takes the moon about 29 days to go around the Earth once, and Saturn about 29 years to go around the sun once. And there's a relationship between the inner and the outer, which causes many people to believe that the moon might have actually been for a very specific reason, not necessarily by God, but by something or someone. We're not going down that route. But in of our We're not online yet.
There we go.
It says here that I am.
Here we are.
All right. Yeah, Bliss says I shouldn't have said what I said about the moon. Someone didn't like that. Yeah, I don't know whether it's solar flares, Uranus, Mercury-Uranus, or Neptune moon, or whether it's just my lousy attitude. No, I have a good attitude, I think. Okay, but thank you. And we are monitoring it here. As soon as I go offline, if I do again, we will be back. So please be patient, and I apologize for whatever the technical issues are that we are dealing with. Where was I?
The chat said 29 days of the moon is where it left.
All right, so the important thing to understand is that we who do astrology, we know about Saturn's cycle. I mean, it's very real. It's the difference between being a child, an adult, and an old person. You know, when you we celebrate our birthday, the Earth goes around the sun once. We acknowledge the vitality, the illumination, the celebration of the sun. Saturn goes around once, and at age 29 and a half or 30, we become grown up. We become an adult. And then at around age 58, Saturn makes its second appearance, and we kind of figure out what we did in life and what we have yet to do. And so Saturn is very real. But here's the important thing, and here's where all this is going, is that when Saturn goes around once in, let's say, 30 years, close enough, Pluto takes 250 years. Okay, it's actually 248 years, but we'll say 250, it's close enough. Nothing in nature is exact as we humans would like it to be, even astrology. All right, so Saturn goes around once in 30 years, and Pluto goes around once in 250 years. Let me make an analogy between that and the moon going around the Earth once in 30 days, actually 28 and a half, 29 days, and the Earth going around the sun once in a year. Now, what happens is that when the moon goes around the Earth, it goes around the Earth and it's back at the exact same space, but then it takes a day or two for it to catch up to the sun, because the sun has moved a sign. In 30 days, the moon goes around once, and in 30 days, the sun has gone from one sign to the next sign to the next sign, which is why we have 12 or 13 new moons a year. The new moon is measured every time the moon catches up with the sun. Are you with me here? Okay. Why this is so important is that astrology is based upon the zodiac, which we reset to 0 at the first moment of the spring equinox every year. It's a marker for us here on Earth. But the most exact way to find a beginning point in any cycle, because a cycle is a circle, and a cycle or a circle has no beginning and has no end. It's an ongoing movement. So one of the ways in which we can actually measure what cycles are all about is when two cycles intersect at the same point at the same time. In other words, once a month, when the moon catches up with the sun, that becomes a new moon. That's the beginning of the lunar month. And lunar calendars calculate that as the first day of the new month. And then a fortnight is halfway through, 2 weeks. And that's halfway through that cycle, because in nature, the real interference, the action occurs at half cycles and half or quarter cycles. So we have a month, and then we have a fortnight, 2 weeks, and then we have a half of that, which is a week. That's the way we measure time. Now let's come back to Saturn and Pluto. Saturn takes 30 years to go around once, but it takes about 32 to 35, 38 years for it to catch up to Pluto, because Pluto has moved down the road a little bit. So in 250 years, there are about 12 conjunctions, or we could call them new moons, but they're really new Saturns to Pluto. And that cycle is an absolutely significant cycle to the history of humanity. And again, I have a video on it. There have been books written about it. This isn't my idea. But you can go back to the major events, which I have. You can go back to the major events for about 2,300 years, which is about as far as we have decent timekeeping on. And every time Saturn lines up with Pluto, or lines up exactly opposite it, like a new moon and a full moon, shit goes down. Technical term. And just for an example, most recently, 1898 was the Spanish-American War. Spain lost most of its colonies around the world. Actually, in 1834 or 35, there was a Saturn-Pluto alignment, and Spain lost most of its holdings in South America. That was the establishment of Ecuador and Colombia and so on. Simon Bolivar, Bolivia also. But in 1898, there was the Spanish-American War, but it was also the founding of the World Zionist Organization. That Zionism goes back before then, but that was when the World Zionist Organization was founded. That was a Saturn-Pluto opposition, like a full moon. At the following, kind of like the new moon that occurred in August of 1914, within a couple of weeks of the exact Saturn-Pluto alignment, Duke Ferdinand was assassinated, and that kicked off World War I. Okay. At the next opposition, that was in 1931, little things like Japan invaded China, Hitler came to power, Mussolini came to power. The Hitler, who did I miss? Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, that's enough. The United States was in the midst of a depression, the Great Depression. That was 1931. Also, in 1914, at the beginning of World War I, this guy named Lawrence of Arabia went and got all the Arabs to fight on the side of the Allies, guaranteeing them freedom from the Turks, from the Ottomans. The Ottoman Empire had pretty much owned that part of the world for many centuries. And they promised the Allies, through Lawrence of Arabia, promised the people who are living in the areas that are now Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, promised all those people that they would be protected from the Ottomans or from the Turks, and after the war, if they fought on the United States and England, Western Europe side, and so on. Which is what happened, which is what caused the dividing up of that whole area of the world into French and British protectorates and so on. But in 1931, that was when, because of the Zionist movement, and because Great Britain was the protector of Palestine, they basically declared martial law because they couldn't figure out what the hell to do, because they had guaranteed by treaty that they would protect Palestine from the Turks. But meanwhile, the Zionists had moved in, and so the Brits threw up their hand. If anyone's either read the book or seen the movie Exodus, that's the opening scenes of Exodus. It's like, it's a mess. That's 1931. In 1947, in August of 47, there's a Saturn-Pluto exact alignment, new moon kind of. They're both at the same point in the constellation of Leo. It occurred in August of 1947. And within a year, before, during, and after, the United Nations was founded, and it was agreed that there would be two nations set up there, that there would be a creation of a Zionist state, and then by 1948, Israel was created and Palestine was gone. Now, I'm just setting all this up because it's part of an ongoing energy that the next conjunction was in 1982, Incidentally, that was when Israel bombed or invaded Lebanon. Also, there was an opposition in the fall of 2001, think World Trade Tower bombing. But when Saturn and Pluto make conjunctions, and we haven't delved down deeper into the conjunctions and oppositions, but squares and even half squares and square and a halves. And when other planets make contacts with Saturn and Pluto also, they exacerbate these events. For example, on October 6th, 7th, 8th, the planet Mars was making a 90-degree, in astrology, a square is maximum conflict. Mars was making a square to Pluto during the October 6th Hamas attack. And every time since then, planets have made hard angled aspects, squares, conjunctions, or half squares to Saturn or Pluto. We've seen another flare up of this event. And actually, the most recent was the first of 3 half squares between Saturn and Pluto that occurred back at the beginning of Israel, the beginning of their attack on the tent camps and the refugee camps in Rafah. So here is that Saturn and Pluto were in alignment the year that Muhammad marched into Mecca and declared Mecca the state of Islam. It was also in the Saturn-Pluto cycle was when the Christians were basically trying to overtake or retake the Holy Land. It was also, in effect, the year that the Arabs invaded Spain, the Arab infusion, the Muslim or Islamic invasion of Spain. And that was in like 700 and something, and it was close. Same Allah got all the Arabs back out of Spain and back over the Mediterranean. This is not a new thing. Oh, incidentally, '07 happened within the week that Great Britain gave.
Broken up.
It doesn't show that. It shows here that I'm still live.
It keeps like juddering in and out.
All right, are we back on yet?
Looks like it.
All right. Again, my apologies to all of you online.
It just needs your attention sometimes.
Yeah. All right. So, by the way, as I was saying just before it broke up again, that within the week of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 1947, August, was when India and Pakistan were granted freedom from the British Empire. And although we learned, it was so wonderful because no one was killed, there was no war, it was just peaceful, protesting, somehow they forgot to tell us in the West that about 500,000 people were killed in battle skirmishes over Kashmir between the Hindus and the Muslims. So these little bits of how history gets rewritten or unwritten. And with respect to that, I think we should also mention which if truly that, some 4,000 arrested until the internet doesn't like it. All right, I think we're back
And
I'm on T-Mobile.
You want to try Verizon? You can-
Very much. It says device. Okay, how about now, Sam? Are we back?
you keep coming back and then dropping again. If it might be possible you've used up all the gigabytes on your hotspot.
No, I have unlimited.
Okay.
And it shows here that the connection is actually sound. Are we back yet or no?
Yeah. So far it's been stuck.
All right. So what's important in all of this is to understand that Saturn and Pluto are in a half square that kicked into exact just last month and will remain so on and off until January of next year. So whatever happens in all of this, there's not going to be a resolution overnight. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be attentive to it and do what we can, whatever that may be on whatever level. But that's one piece of all of this. Now, the other piece of this is the fact that we talked about Saturn and Pluto. The other piece of this is that Pluto, as many of you know, has just moved into Aquarius. I say just, it did that last March. It moved back into Capricorn. It's in Aquarius. It's moving back into Capricorn, September, October, November, and December it'll be back in Aquarius again, where it'll be for a couple of decades. Why is this important? This is the first time Pluto has been in Aquarius since America was born and the American Revolution, the Constitution of the United States, and even the French Revolution, both of which we moderners can't quite grasp, because the idea that people could band together and overtake a God-given right of a monarch was something that was just never happened before. It never happened before. And it happened in the late 1700s, between 1770-ish and 1790-ish, when Pluto was dancing from Capricorn to Aquarius. And the interesting thing about that is that in astrology, the slower moving the cycle, the rarer the cycle, the more important the event is. And so we have Pluto now going back to where it was when the United States was born for the first time since it was born. It's like its first birthday in 250 years, because Pluto is a 250-year cycle. You with me here? On top of that, we have another rhythm, because astrology is cycles within cycles within cycles. And the other rhythm has to do with Jupiter. Jupiter is, in traditional astrology, Jupiter is called the greater benefic. I like to think of it as the cosmic good guy. Unfortunately, too much of a good thing is not always a good thing. Hippocrates said that any tonic in excess is toxic. So Jupiter is an expander. It's a bigger, better. It's a magnifying lens. And Jupiter takes 12 years to go around once. And Jupiter just last week changed signs from Taurus, where it's been for about 7 years, into Gemini, where it's going to. Let me say that again. I got Jupiter and Uranus mixed up. Bless you, bless you. Jupiter last week changed signs from Taurus to Gemini. It had been in Taurus for a year, and it's now going to be in Gemini for a year, because Jupiter takes 12 years to go around the zodiac or around the sun once. Now, what that means is that Jupiter moves into Aquarius. Jupiter moves into Gemini once every 12 years. It's rare, but it's not that rare. It happens every 12 years. But here's the important thing to understand about what happened last week. In astrology, I know many of you are either serious students or even professionals, in astrology, every planet relates to a sign and every sign relates to a planet. Aries relates to Mars, Mars relates to Aries, Mars relates to Aries and Scorpio. Venus relates to Taurus and Libra. Mercury relates to Gemini and Virgo. Every planet relates to a sign or two, and every sign relates to a planet or two. Traditionally, this is called the system of rulerships. I don't like the word rulerships because it's an artifact of a patriarchal dominance, but we're not going down that rabbit hole today either. Although it was a lecture that I did at NORWAC last week on the patriarchal bias of astrology. So it's important to understand that Uranus, which was discovered in the late 1700s, around the time of the American and French revolutions, Uranus is the planet of revolution. It's the planet of shock, surprise, awe. It's the lightning striking that goes, I can see what I didn't see before. And now the lightning's gone, but you know that that old burnt out car is over there, because in the middle of the night when the lightning flashed, you see it. Uranus is sometimes called Uranus the Great Awakener. It's the planet of shock, surprise, awe, opening, revolution, technology, future. That's what Uranus's job is. It breaks down by sudden action, unexpected action. It breaks down the boundaries of Saturn. And when Uranus was discovered, it was shocking if you were alive in the late 1700s to realize that Saturn was no longer the king of the hill, the end of the road, the restaurant at the end of the universe. There was a whole vast thing beyond it, and Uranus was that awakening. In ancient astrology, Saturn was the planet that corresponded with both Capricorn and Aquarius. In modern astrology, since Uranus was discovered, Uranus has been given to the sign of Aquarius. Most moderners understand that Uranus and Aquarius have a natural affinity. Got it? All right. So, last month on April 20th, well, that's now almost a month and a half ago, what happened was Jupiter caught up with the planet Uranus, as it does once every 13, 14 years, because it takes 12 years to go around once, and then it catches up to Uranus. And so it takes about 14 years for it to be a new moon or the beginning of the cycle between Jupiter and Uranus. Why is this significant? It happens every 14 years, but when it does, there's always technological breakthroughs. There's always shock and surprise of new awarenesses that we didn't have before. And often it takes weeks, months, or even years to see what it was that woke up at that moment of time. For those of you who were alive and of age in July of 1969, on July 20th, I think the date was 1969, there was an exact alignment of Uranus and Jupiter, with the moon sweeping through and lined up with them exactly at the time that they aligned, within a few hours of the moment that Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon. That was a typical Uranus-Jupiter conjunction. Things like the inventions of the telephone and the internet and first radio broadcasts and certainly social revolutions also, but these technological breakthroughs are the ones that happen to be in my mind right now. That happens every 14 years, and it happened on April 20th. Jupiter magnifies the shock, surprise, awakening, and new awareness of Uranus. Are you with me? But Uranus is humming to the sign of Aquarius. And the last time that Jupiter lined up with Uranus, while Pluto was in Uranus's home sign Aquarius. Are you with me? Did you get that? That Uranus's home sign or resonant sign is Aquarius. And Pluto takes 250 years to go around once. And although Jupiter catches up with Uranus every 14 years. The last time Jupiter caught up with Uranus, while Pluto, the slowest moving of all the low frequency, long wave, 250-year cycle planets, the last time Jupiter caught up with Uranus, while Pluto was in Uranus's home sign, was in the late spring, early summer of 1789, within 2 weeks of the storming of the Bastille, which was the turning point in the French Revolution, which was common human beings overtaking a monarchy, which was considered to be absolutely impossible. In fact, that same year, although we think of the United States being born July 4th, 1776, with Thomas Jefferson, who was an Aries, penning the Declaration of Independence. That's pretty, kind of interesting, because Aries is the sign of freedom and independence, and Thomas Jefferson did that largely. But although we consider the birth of the United States to be July 4th, 1776, there was this little thing that had to happen, which was the war against England. And that then the Constitutional Congress met, and it wasn't until 1789 that the first session of Congress was called. And in 1789, at that first session of Congress, the year of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction after Pluto had moved into Aquarius. In other words, the last time there was a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction with Pluto having moved into Aquarius was within a few weeks of the storming of the Bastille, and the same year as the first session of the US Congress, which was also when they ratified the United States Constitution. And also during that session, what they do, they established the American judicial system, which is still in effect today. Now, do you see the importance of what went on yesterday and what's been going on in the United States? Because whether you say we're in a constitutional crisis or not, or whether the Supreme Court is totally tainted and doesn't have anything to do with justice anymore, when so many Supreme Court justices have been bought by, how do I say this nicely? Someone. White supremacist old men who are colonialists and greedy capitalists. Was that okay? Kinda. But you get the picture. There's something going on that has nothing to do with whether you vote for this candidate or that candidate. There's something deeper going on. And there's something deeper going on that most people, or many people, feel that, yes, I'll vote for this guy because he's the lesser of two evils, or I'll vote for this guy because he's more into destroying what I know is already needs to be destroyed, or whatever your rationale or judgments are. Again, I'm not trying to change those here and now, not that I wouldn't at some point in time, but my point here is that what went on yesterday is so crazy, because there's a large percentage, whether it's a quarter, a third, a half, over a half, that says this was the greatest moment in the American judicial system. It shows that someone in power has to pay for what they do, regardless of who they are or what they've done, blah, 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 blah. And then there are a third, a quarter, a half, I don't know, people who are saying basically exactly the opposite. This is the worst thing that's ever happened. It just shows how the entire system is rigged and fixed and gets what it wants. What I'm trying to do here is paint a picture of what's going on right now in our lives before us is of the same level of importance as what was going on in the late 1700s when the monarchies basically lost power. Get it? It may not happen today or tomorrow or this month. It may not even happen in November. I have no presidential election. I have no idea what's going to happen then. There's a lot of time between now and then. And I've been saying for a couple of years that I didn't think either Biden or Trump would be on the final ticket. And I get that that may be based on the illusion based on wish fulfillment more than anything else. But regardless, that's the level of what it is we're dealing with right now. And it's not going to be resolved by a court case yesterday. And it's not going to be resolved by a presidential election in November. But we are now in the winds of change after the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of January of 2020, which put the entire globe on suspended animation for a year and a half. Meaning COVID and quarantine, and again, it's just another example of how half the world looks at it this way and half the world looks at it that way, and never the twain shall meet. We are in with Uranus portal, opening up a door.
Can you pause for one moment? It's just generating, just let it work it out.
So much for that portal.
All right, it's working again.
All right. And again, my apologies to all of you online. We will figure out something by next month, but this obviously is not functional. So my point is that portal on April 20th, something opened. And it opened in a way that we might think it was just a week of events of students demonstrating at Columbia or UCLA, which was very close to that period at the end of April. It's not going away. This is not just an aberration of something happened on a Thursday afternoon or the last week of April. This is a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction with Pluto in Aquarius. Pluto is just still feeling its way in Aquarius. It's got 20 years to move through Aquarius, the sign of the future, the sign of technology, the sign of the common human in a network rather than a hierarchical situation. Remember, Capricorn is a sign based on hierarchy. The mountain goat lives at the highest altitudes of any mammal, and the dolphin or the sea goat lives at the lowest altitudes, and hierarchy is what's important to a Capricorn. It's why Capricorns need to master something to reach the top of their mountain, because it's about finding hierarchy, it's rulership, it's mastery. Aquarius is about networking. And with Pluto in Aquarius, we are at the tip of this very much larger change that may be frightening to many people. And if it's not frightening to you on some level, then you probably don't understand how big these changes are going to be, because the age of Aquarius is probably still 100 years away. The ages last 2,000 years. And we're 2,000 years into the age of Pisces, the fish, the sign of Christianity, the sign of belief but separation from the divine, where you need an intermediary to be mystical and connect you with God. And we're moving into the age of Aquarius, where everyone is equal. Now, that equality sounds good on paper, but I always like to remind people that a good example of a community based upon equality would be a termite colony. So there is this fear of loss of individuality, which is not a discussion for tonight, but it is there. However, the larger sweep of things is the portal has been opened. And now Jupiter has left Taurus and moved into Gemini, where it's forming a harmonious trine to Pluto, which is deepening our understanding of what this Aquarian energy is, giving it power, giving it reality, because Gemini is often thought as a lightweight. It's, it's the spring breeze. It's the, that light breeze that when you're flying a kite, it can blow this way, then that way. It's not like a steady wind that you can set your sail and just go. Gemini is about adaptability. It's about breezes blowing both ways at once. And so there is a lot of instability this time of year now that the sun has moved into Gemini. And actually what I'm going to do here, I'm not exactly sure how to do this, but I'm going to see if I can bring up a chart so that I can bring this part to a close. Let me see if I go here to banners. Should be a place here where I can. All right. All right. This may or may not work here. I just hang with me here 1 second. Video backgrounds. Okay, this is what we want to do. I want to all right, I may not be able to do this. I'll have to figure this out for part 2 here, but
If you're trying to show the chart, hit present
hit present.
in the left side.
There we go. All right. Aha. Thank you. And we're going to go select window or screen, and we're going to go here. I think this will do fine. And allow. And what is that showing online? We have a little bit of a delay, I know, but doom, 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 doom. You are sharing another application window. That doesn't work. All right, let's try it this way. One more try. Present, and we'll just go share screen. And let's see, did that do anything? It may take a little bit of a delay. No?
No, it should show up in the stage times and it doesn't.
All right, one more try here, and then, yeah, that's what they say. They also say 3 strikes and you're out, though, just to be clear. All right, so we're going to go present and share screen. And it looks like here.
Something is very wrong there.
All right.
Yeah, that didn't, like, the drop-down menu is messed up. There's some glitch going on right now.
All right, having issues. That's what we are. There's the thing right there, having issues. Settings. It's not going to be there. It's going to be mute, stop cam, settings, present. Let's try that again.
You're right clicking.
Not anymore. There we go. Slides, extra camera.
What's that on the bar down below? What is that announcement that below, like, you need permissions?
Where?
On your taskbar.
Taskbar.
Down at the bottom of the computer, the blue and yellow shield.
Wait a minute.
It might be asking permission for you to display screen. I kind of doubt it, but
Oh. Third from the right on the bottom.
On the task bar.
On the bottom.
where all the applications are.
The bottom. Very bottom. The bottom.
On the bottom. Here?
Oh no, it's in the. It might on your computer, on your laptop. It might be different. You might have to hit a down arrow on the taskbar.
Well, I'm here.
That
Yeah.
shield, that blinking shield.
Far right.
The
Far right.
Oh,
Real, one more.
One or
Left.
two over left.
left.
There.
Yeah.
Microsoft is requesting
All
your.
right. This probably is not relevant.
Yeah.
No, it's Skype.
No.
Might as well say yes. We love Skype.
No, I don't want Skype. Get the hell out of there. All right, exit setup, yes. We don't want that. All right, hold on. All right, one more try here. And then if not, I'm going to go on without this and we'll share screen. It thinks it's doing it.
All right.
All right, one more try here, setting. Before I got a window though that actually, all right. Picture-in-picture layout. Let's see that.
So Rick, if you have to go long tonight, it's okay.
Thank you. Solo layout.
Yeah, it's not the layout. It's having to choose the thing to present, and it's just glitching there.
I wonder if you refresh the page.
Hold on, one more try here.
Try refreshing.
Well, if I want to stay on this page, I don't want to leave it. All right, hold on one more second here. And all right, we're letting it go. It's one of those nights. All right. For those of you who are here and can see this, you can see that Jupiter is connected to Pluto by a big, thick blue line. That's a trine. It's a harmonious 1/3 of a circle. And the reason why this is significant is that this is exact on June 2nd. We're not quite there yet, but it's close enough that we're already feeling it because Jupiter just moved into Gemini, and over the next few days ahead, the first few days of this month, Jupiter will make a harmonious trine with Pluto. At the same time, Neptune is at the very, very last degree of Pisces, ready to go to the next sign, Aries, but it turns retrograde the beginning of July. And so it never quite makes it into Aries, not until next year. But we have this kind of triangle between Pluto in Aquarius and Jupiter in Gemini and Neptune, and tonight with the moon right there at the very end of Pisces, just about ready to move into Aries. This is, for me, the important thing about what's going on now, because over the days ahead, if we were to move this chart ahead a day at a time, we can see Mercury right now at 25 degrees of Taurus. We move this ahead a couple of days, and Mercury by June 3rd enters Gemini, and it catches up with Jupiter, and it makes that same trine with Pluto. And so it sustains this deep, powerful undercurrent. Remember, Pluto is the underworld. It's that which is hidden. A plutocracy is a government that is run by not the people who have a lot of money. It's the people who have so much money, it's hidden, you don't know the money is there. Pluto is what's underground. To the ancients, if you had money, that was good to get by, but the wealth was owning land and owning gold or silver or copper or tin or diamonds, or iron, things that were under the ground. That was the real wealth. And a plutocracy is not a government by people who have money. It's a government by people who have hidden money that are so wealthy, you don't even know that it's there. It's underground, it's hidden. And as Jupiter, which is the planet of bringing things out into the open, making things bigger and more, Jupiter trines Pluto, we're seeing some of that come out into the open. And with Mercury coming right behind it, we're getting glimpses of it. But here's the important thing. And that is by next year, Uranus, which takes 84 years to go around once, unlike Jupiter that spends 1 year in each sign, Uranus spends 7 years in each sign, and it's at the tail end of its 7th year in Taurus. Next year, Uranus enters Gemini. And what's going to happen when it does? It's going to make that same trine with Pluto. And the last time that Uranus trine Pluto was in the this outer planet cycles. Anyone who's heard me talk about these topics before, and certainly anyone who's done astrology work, knows that this thing that we call the 60s was a result or an artifact of Uranus, the planet of awakening, opening, shock, surprise, revolution, lining up with Pluto, the deepest repressed bacchanalian urges that were underground and came exploding out into awareness in the 1960s. That was a Uranus-Pluto conjunction. And in fact, there was a Uranus-Pluto square in the 2010s, 2012 to 2015, when most of the issues of the mid-60s, sex, drugs, rock and roll, use of drugs to legalization of medical and recreational cannabis and other substances, civil rights, 60s to the 2010s. Ferguson, Missouri happened during that period of time. Revolution on the streets, like in Chicago, 1968, compared to the Arab Spring and Occupy Wall Street and so on in 2012 when the Uranus-Pluto square was exact. Now, why is this important? It's because this Jupiter trining Pluto right now is giving us a flavor and a taste of what will be happening from 2025, really 26, 7, 8, as Uranus is making that exact harmonious trine from Gemini to Pluto in Aquarius. And I believe that what that means is that things like they did in the 20s, even though there were the wild, roaring 20s, politically, they were settled down. And in other words, I think that the dynamic period of time that we're in right now, with the winds of change blowing strong, but changing every day, every week, every month, you really can't catch a wind that you know is going to take you somewhere really off into the distance, because the winds are too unstable, that those winds over the next couple of years will become so stable that the chance we have to make changes now won't be there. For better and for worse. So that's food for thought, things to think about. Now, the other things about June is that although by the beginning of the month we have the Sun, Venus, and Jupiter in Gemini, and then Mercury moves into Gemini. Then by the 6th, we have a new moon in Gemini with 4 or 5 planets in Gemini, the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter. And this is really exciting because there's a lot of movement, and yet these planets are all basically moving toward a square with Saturn. The authority doesn't go away. And a square and a half to Pluto. There's some deeper structure that's still cooking there. In my June forecast, which I said I recorded earlier today, I talk about that much more in depth with the actual dates and the things to watch for. But this is part of the thing of June, is that there's a lot of movement, but not a lot of stability. And then as the month goes on, we can see that that the planets in Gemini begin to move one by one into Cancer, starting around the 17th when Mercury and Venus move into Cancer, and then the first day of summer on the 20th when the Sun moves into Cancer, and all of a sudden it's a whole different ball game. The energy really, I wanted to say it grounds out, but it's not ground, it's water. It's like, in its time, the difference between the time of year in the northern climes of Gemini, when there's leaves on trees and bugs in the air, there's just that kind of spring buzz that happens with Gemini energy. But when the planets move into Cancer, the real growth becomes in the wet soil underground. It's the roots that kind of really dig in, and there is a grounding, but it's really about a swelling emotionally and or in water, because astrologically water and emotions are interchangeable. They're one and the same, so to speak. And so I think by the end of June, the energy will change and we'll find ourselves less moved to communicate about everything and more sitting with what it is going on, waiting for the next chance to make motion, to make a move. But I also think that during this time, these planets, Mercury, Venus, and the Sun, as they move from Gemini to Cancer, one by one, they will square Saturn, while they're still in Gemini, and then they will square Neptune as they move into Cancer. And so the confusion factor is not going to go away. Even if you think you're on the right side of this issue, that issue, that issue, and that issue, by the end of the month, you may be wondering, maybe that issue I have wrong. That one I don't. But when I'm strong on that issue, then that puts me in a camp with all these people who have different thoughts on another. It's confusing. And the confusion is not going to go away overnight. But I think that by the end of the month, we'll have a real sense of what directions here's the difference. In Gemini, it's the fickle, the fickle finger of fate. It's the fickle winds that are blowing this way and that way and this way and that way. And yet by the time we get to the middle and end of June, rather than it being air, it's water, and the tides take longer to change, and so they're more reliable. We can see which way the tides are pulling, which gives us a better ability to know how to navigate or negotiate the direction in which we want to go. And the other thing that happens is that by the 21st, we have and actually, I think it's early on the 22nd. It depends on where you are in the world. But by the 21st, 22nd, we have the full moon in Capricorn. And this, I think, is it's a very confusing full moon, because with the Sun in Cancer, we want to stay at home. We want to feel protected. We want to be safe. We want to stay behind our shell. We feel insecure, and we don't want to be buffeted around by the winds or the tides of change. And yet the moon in Capricorn is saying, yeah, but I can't stay at home. I need to go out in the real world, whatever real is. And that question of what is real is exacerbated by the fact that this Capricorn full moon and the Cancer sun are still squaring Neptune at that very last inch of Pisces. And both Neptune and Saturn are slowing down to turn retrograde. Saturn turns retrograde or stations to change direction on the 29th, and then Neptune turns retrograde early July. And so we're getting this larger energy of things feel like right now they're wild and moving and exciting and uncertain. But by the time we get to the end of the month, I think we're going to realize that we're in it for a longer haul, and that we may not be quite as on edge and as uncertain, but we, I think, have a better sense of the direction in which we are going. I think that's it. Enough? Too much? Makes sense for those of you who are new? Did some of this kind of help see a different view of what's going on? Again, for the day-by-day stuff, that'll be on the June forecast that I'll get posted, assuming that my technological issues are not plaguing me when I get home later this evening, and then I'll get that up tomorrow. This will go live and will be available for either rewatching or for those who did not see it. And for those of you who are on my Patreon, the middle of the month, I will post a day-by-day update for the second half of the month. And you can find more about that if you're not on my Patreon by going to Patreon, patreon.com/Rick Levine. I'll also put the link in the comments. And at the solar level, which is just $3 a month, you get that mid-month update in addition to the free forecast, which everyone has available to them. Before we break, two things. Number one, any questions, comments, feedback? Your chance. Loudly.
Do you consider the nodes of the moon? Because I can't help but thinking about quartz and war.
You can't help thinking about what?
The quartz and war.
Okay. So the question is, for those of you online, is do I consider and do I think about the nodes of the moon? The answer is yes, a lot more than may be obvious from what I talked about this evening, because as I said at the very beginning, all things happen because of the intersection of two orbits. And the moon's orbit around the Earth and the Earth's orbit around the sun create what are called the nodes, or the intersecting points of those orbits. And it's really where the whole show begins. You know, in some ways, it's what the Hindus call Maya, this veil of illusion that we see as the real world, which is really just a shield from the world that exists beyond the world of what we perceive. And so, yes, the fact that the nodes are in Aries and in Libra, they're always opposite one another, is important, because Aries is the sign of I, me, mine, self. And Libra is the sign of the relationship between I, me, mine, and myself and everything else. And therefore, the quartz system is that balance beam, because Libra is the only sign in the zodiac that's not an alive animal. All the others are rams and fish and goats and twins and things that are alive. Libra is the balance point. And from that standpoint, what's going on in the quartz, I think, is certainly important, because it is an increase in that. But it's also important, and I think it'll become important as the month continues and as the planets move through mid-Cancer. They're going to be square or 90 degrees to that nodal axis, because Cancer is 90 degrees to Aries and Libra. And I think we may see an opportunity and a real stress point on that whole system come the end of June, starting around the 22nd, 3rd, 4th. Oh, what the hell just happened? Runaway chart. There we go. That we can see that by the end of the month, Venus is at the 90-degree point, And then by the beginning of July, the sun is moving through that 90-degree point. And I think that this will put quite a bit of stress on that. So yes, thank you for bringing that up. All right, then last two things before we break. We'll take a short break, and because we got so late, I'll probably only do 2 charts tonight, but I have slips of paper that I'll put on that table that you can fill out. If you've never had your chart done here, I'm going to draw 2 or 3 names out of a hat. And the hat is there on the table. And what I need you to do is put your full name. I will only use your first name if I draw your name out of the hat, but put your full name, your birth date, place, and time, and an email address in case I need to get a hold of you. And also, if you do put your name in the hat for consideration, I'll do 2 or 3 charts kind of to give you a sense of how all this works, but in real time with individuals. If you need to go or have had enough of me, it's your time to slip out gracefully, although you're free to do that at any time. Also, if you're going to get anything at the bar, do it now because they will close down as we come back. And thank you so much, not only to Soul Food, but to the baristas. And I always have to give my little, hold on, I'll let you applaud them in a moment. But I think it's also important to remember that we don't only vote every November at the ballot box. Every time you purchase something, you vote. And I'm sure that many of us have gifts that we need to get for someone, whether they're birthday gifts or very early Christmas shopping or whatever. And spend your money here rather than at the big box store down the block and around the corner or online. It's our way of supporting what this place does to support what we do here. It's a community place, even though they have to keep going. So we will reconvene in about 10 minutes, and I'll look at some charts. And if you're interested, fill out one of those things, one of the forms there with your name and birthday, place, time. Make sure you mark AM or PM. And also, there are business cards on both of these tables. And just a quick reminder, there'll be postcards here on this table also, if anyone is considering coming to Goa. Actually, you have 2 people here. Who are the 2 people that were in Goa? Callie and Michael. Are you still floating around somewhere? He's in the back. So a 12-day retreat, November 23rd to December 4th in the south end of Goa on the Arabian Sea. Magical, beautiful. And there's information on the postcard and links for a complete curriculum there. And that's it. Thank you all for coming out. And I'll see many of you in about 10 minutes. Now you can applaud the baristas and thank Soul Food. All right, we will start in a minute or two, seeing as how the moon just moved into Aries, so now the party begins. Okay, putting a Jupiter on the outside of it is not going to get you picked.
Not good luck.
Maybe. All right.
Could you move that half?
Okay. Here we go. All right, now, welcome back to all of those of you who are online, and welcome for still being here for those of you who are still here. Now, Sam, are we now on screen and we're showing a chart?
Yes, sir.
And so this is the chart for actually right now. And the moon has just moved into Aries. It's at 0 degrees Aries and 7 minutes. And as that moon over the next hour, over the next 2 to 3 hours, as the moon moves about 1 degree every 2 hours, the moon is going to form an exact trine with Jupiter, 8:30, 9:30, 10:30, but before midnight yet tonight. And then by tomorrow morning and early in the day tomorrow, the moon, as it continues to move, and I said trine, I meant sextile, the moon will make a sextile first with Jupiter in the next few hours. We may already be feeling that optimism and positive energy, but then it will make a sextile with Venus and the Sun by tomorrow. So, yeah, all right, let's get a couple of charts. I got 3 picked. We'll see if we get to all 3. And remember that if I pick your chart, by the way, by picking your chart, that means that you've agreed that you are here and that you'll be honest and interactive, because although it may be nice for you to have your chart done, this is not for you. You're being used. It's for us, because each of these are teaching moments. And but I do ask you to be honest. And on the other hand, if there's something you don't want to share, you will not be pressured. I mean, this is not like a one-to-one meeting with your psychologist or doctor or astrologer. And so it's okay to just say, no, I don't want to talk about it. I have no problem with that. And also, because for those that I've collected, you'll get an email from me thanking you for submitting your name and giving you an opportunity to either be on my mailing list or not. And for that matter, if any of you want to make sure that you get notified each month as to when the astrology night is and so on, even if you fill out one of those things with just your name and email address on it, that'll get you on my email list. Or you can just go to www.kelsey, Rick Levine, www.ricklevineastrologer.com. That wasn't that hard. All right, so when I identify you or say your name, you need to at least let us know where you are so that if we make fun of you, no, I'm kidding. We know. So the first one I picked is Emilie, born 10/10. Emilie. So Emilie, what's your story with astrology?
I started seriously studying astrology about 2 years ago, and just in the last couple months, I've started to kind of be more part of the community, getting to read other people's charts, learn more about transits, and coming to these talks. And so I definitely would love to hear your perspective on my birth chart.
Cool, except I have you born in the year 99, not in the year 1999, just off by 1,000 years. And let's see, that is 2:18 a.m., 2:18 a.m. And do you know your chart a bit?
I do.
What's your favorite thing about your chart?
Probably my Sagittarius Mars in the 5th house. I like that it's very creative, it's very open to experiences, and I like just trying new things all the time.
20 degrees Leo rising? Close enough? All right. So when I look at a chart, and one of the things that I always teach my students to do is what I call first shot, best shot. Doesn't mean it's the right shot, but it's when you look at a chart, what do you see first? So when you look at this chart, what pops off the page? And by the way I have solar fire set up here is that the closer the aspect, the tighter the orb, the fatter the line. And I notice when I look at Emilie's chart, the first thing I notice is that there's a lot of lines that are close. And that's not good or bad. It just means that there's a lot of aspects that are close. And so they're resonant. But the blue lines are trines and sextiles, and the red lines are squares and oppositions. The green lines are quincunxes and semisextiles, and the orange lines are half squares, and although there are none here, squares and a half, or is that square and a halves? I don't know. Cups full, cup fulls. I don't know. So when you look at Emily's chart, what do you notice first, aside from the fact that, as Emilie said, there is a Mars in Sagittarius in the 5th house? That would be down here. Let's see if I can make this bigger. There we go. Mars in the 5th house in Sagittarius. What do you notice? Anyone?
Venus, Jupiter trine.
Venus, Jupiter trine. Let me get this. Yeah, that Venus-Jupiter trine is pretty close. Even though it's not partile, a partile aspect is an aspect where the number of degrees is the same. So this is 1 degree of Taurus and 2 degrees of Virgo, but it's not partile, even though it's just a little over 1/4 of a degree apart, because it's 1 degree and 42 minutes. That's like, just like minutes on a clock, 45 minutes is 1 3/4, you know? So it's like 3/4 of an hour, it's 3/4 of a degree. And then this is 2 degrees and 2 minutes. So this is like within 1/3 of a degree, but it's not partile. If it was partile, it would have to be 1 degree and 1 degree, just as a point of languaging of astrology. But that's really close. And Venus and Jupiter in the Hellenistic tradition are considered to be the benefics, which is a misleading term because that seems like if the benefics are good, then the malefics should be bad. but it's really not just good or bad. It's really more like the Greeks saw them as easy and hard. In other words, if Jupiter is the planet of more and Venus is the planet of pleasure, it's easier to deal with them, although, you know, too many chocolates is not necessarily good, but it's easier to deal with the problem of abundance than with Mars, which is the planet of conflict and war, and Saturn, the other malefic, is the planet of authority and or the taskmaster, discipline. And so here is a trine between the two benefics, which could be good, but it's interesting here because Chiron, also in Sagittarius, even though it's in the 4th house, not the 5th house, the houses just start here at the ascendant and go 1, 2, 3, 4. We could do a numbered version, but this is the wheel that I have up. But Chiron at 1 degree and 42 minutes, holy smokes, 1 degree 42 minutes, Jupiter 1 degree 42 minutes. This is exact. And those people who have studied with me know that if you have two planets that are in the same degree, that's considered partile. But if they're the same degree and same minute, I have a term that I've coined for that, and I call them fucking nailed. It's almost like that aspect is so close, but gee, even the Venus in there Okay, again, my apologies to those of you online. We've been plagued all evening by tech issues for no real reason. Yes, Roxana, Rick was abducted by aliens, but after just minor physical probes and other forms of mental and emotional abuse, they've deposited me back here, and it looks like I never left. Yes, and they can alter that space-time fabric so that they can do an abduction, take you to Venus or Pluto and bring you back and deposit you the second you left. And you never even know. All right, now, with a little luck, we should have a screen back up. And And I'm talking about the Jupiter, Venus, Chiron, Neptune, all at 1 or 2 degrees, and they are going from Jupiter to Venus is a trine, Venus to Chiron is a square, Chiron to Neptune is actually a half a trine or a sextile, 1/6 of a circle, and Neptune back to Jupiter is a square. So what we have here is easy, smooth flowing energy between the benefics, Venus and Jupiter, and we also have really flowing energy between Chiron. Chiron often is called Chiron the wounded healer, but I like to say, or I like to remind us, that the wounded healer is not Chiron's last name. That actually Chiron was also the original mentor, taught the Greek gods and Hercules and Asclepius, and Chiron was a centaur who basically was a healer and a teacher. And so with Chiron harmonized with Neptune, one might imagine that Emilie has things that come from an emotional or physical wound, that's Chiron, and as humans we all do. But with Neptune harmonizing or sextiling Chiron, there's something here about a spiritual teaching or following or path that enables you either to learn or to help or teach others. But then we look to the Jupiter trine, the Venus trine Jupiter, and here is a practical Jupiter in Taurus, sensual, physical, grounded. Venus in Virgo, also practical, grounded, careful. And these earth energies, because they are abundant, can actually create this environment where there is a flow between this pleasant energy, even to the point of overdoing. But here's the complicating factor, and that is that both of those planets are square the other planet. So we have trine and sextile, and then a square. And the square between Chiron and Venus, and the square between Neptune and Jupiter, in some way indicate the work or the struggle or the conflict between what happens when you take something that's really spiritual and magical and compassionate and Neptunian, that agape, no boundary between me and you. And the square to Jupiter says it can be too much. And so there's this need sometimes perhaps to dial things back. And the same thing with Chiron and Venus. There's just this sense of the how do I want to say it, the complications that can ensue from the what you like, what you love, what you're attracted to, and the Chiron, the things that get in the way because of either the fears that may be associated with a early childhood situation or family situation or some wound, emotional or whatever. And when I say whatever, I don't mean that dismissively. It means I don't have a clue. And if we were sitting alone, we might talk about it, but we ain't going to have that conversation because we don't know who the hell these people are, and you don't want to have that conversation. But does that make a little sense to you, what I've said? And let the jury acknowledge that the witness has nodded her head vertically, So, okay. Now, we didn't even mention the fact that when I said, what do you see first about the chart? No one said, oh, Emilie is a Leo rising. And no one said, Emilie was born just a few hours after a new moon. Actually, she was born 22 hours after a new moon. How do I know that? Because there's about 11 degrees between the sun and the moon. 16 plus 11 is 27. This is like rounding off quick, dirty mathematics. Can you see that there's about 11 degrees between them? I know the moon moves a degree every 2 hours. So it's 11 degrees is about 22 hours. And so this new moon occurred on the day before Emilie was born, but it was a new moon in what sign? Libra, because the sun only moves 1 degree every day, while the moon moves about 12 to 14 degrees a day. So we have a Libra sun and a Libra moon, which would suggest to me which planet might be very important in this chart. Because Venus is the planet that is the traditional ruler of Libra, or I would say is the key planet associated with Libra. And Venus in this chart is in Virgo, which is what element? It's Earth. Down to earth. It's practical. And Venus in Virgo is practical and discriminating. You know, Virgo is Latin for virgin, but virgin in the Roman tradition, virgin had nothing to do with whether or not you had sex. In fact, a virgin was a class of citizen that was a woman who was not property. Because all women were, and to some extent still may be, but to a much lesser extent, hopefully today. But in the Greek and Roman society, as a youth, a woman was property of her father. And then when there was a proper financial transaction that we call dowry, the father would pay someone to take this weight off his shoulders, and then the woman would become the property of her husband. And so as property, the woman had to obey the owner. But women who were not property fell into 2 classes largely. And they were the temple priestesses and the prostitutes. They were considered virgins because they had the right to say no. And this is what Virgo is all about, the binary function. It's about the ability to say yes or no, whereas those who are not Virgo or virgin basically do not have the right of refusal, so to speak. In the body, every sign relates to some aspect of the body, and Virgo relates to the colon. What happens in the colon? The body says what? Yes or no. In the body, it says, ooh, this is good. It's a sugar. I can get energy out of it. I'm letting this in and I'm assimilating it. Ooh, that's not so good. It's shit. I'm going to send it along. And this is what Virgo actually does in life. That's why Virgos are considered to be good critics. They can look at any situation and go, this is okay. That's not okay. I want that. I don't want that. It's the list maker. And Venus is what you like. And so with Venus and Virgo, there's probably a lot of attention to what is it that you like? What is it? What are your values? What are you attracted to? What are you not attracted to? And how does that flow smoothly with the Jupiter part that says, if it feels good, I like it more, as opposed to the square to Chiron that says, nope, there's a deeper teaching here. And how does this bring up some previous wound or fear or piece of humanity that I have that is preventing me from going there? Now, yeah, that's basically, oh, and then we would probably want to say something about the Mercury in Scorpio, and that's the piece of you that has to do with the sharpness of your perceptions, because Scorpio has this ability to see things deeper than they typically are. They go in, they go down, they go deep. And so that Mercury in Scorpio is not quite as easygoing as the Libra side of you might sometimes appear. But don't pass off Librans as being lightweights just because they're agreeable. They're agreeable because they got a strategy. You know, Librans are absolute kings and queens of tactics and strategy. You know, the book by Sun Yen, The Art of War. I mean, it's a Libran kind of a thing. Sitting down and playing a game of chess or going to war is a Libran thing of balance and trying to figure out how you equalize, you know, the odds. And the sun and moon in Libra are certainly like that. But that Mercury in Scorpio is not interested in balance. It's interested in winning. Or in making sure that the other loses. Last thing here is that we might also make the observation that the planet Uranus is moving through the latter degrees of Taurus now, And Jupiter, over the last year, it moved into Taurus and reached the top of Emilie's chart and then lined up with Saturn. And so one might expect that over the last year, that there were opportunities from Jupiter returning, kind of beginning a long-term opportunity cycle. And yet with Uranus reaching the top of the chart, maybe a couple, maybe 2-3 years ago, and I'm just ballparking this, I'm not going to look it up exactly, but Uranus then lining up with Saturn, there may have been some shocks and surprises that weren't quite what you bargained for, that had this sense of Saturn as the part of us that's immovable. We know what we're doing and we know where we're going. And Uranus comes along and just the lightning strikes and it's just not what you thought it was. And so there may have been a change, over the last, year or maybe 2 or 3 in the direction that you've taken in your life in general, as far as your career, your goal, your mission. Is that true in any way? Or?
Yeah, I actually have interesting story. It's short, but I was looking at my last year of transits, and last year on the day that Jupiter was conjunct my midheaven, it was also sextile to Saturn in my 8th house. And on that day, I had a family member out of the blue pay off a significant portion of the credit card debt that I had, which enabled me to quit the job I had, to take a pay cut, to do a career change.
Got it. And for those of you online, I don't know if you could hear that online, but basically when Jupiter reached the midheaven, which is the career point in our chart, and Jupiter is often considered to be the lucky planet, although I always think of Thomas Jefferson's line, which shows the relationship between Saturn, which is hard work and discipline, and Jupiter, which is opportunity or luck. Thomas Jefferson wrote, "The more I prepare, the luckier I get." But this connection, the sextile between Jupiter and Saturn would be something real, Saturn and Jupiter, that basically allowed some opportunity to be pursued. Yeah, and there are other things, but does that make sense? Is that a little bit of a flavor of something for you?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
All right. Do we have Casey in the house? That's no fair. No, we're not allowed to do 2 people sitting next to each other. All right, hold on. We'll get Casey here. Not sure how that happened, but. What's that?
We were talking about the Libran qualities earlier, about this strategy, and Kelsey has some Libra things that you will find on top of it.
So you guys know each other?
We just met.
All right, even better. 1:25 p.m. and that is in a Spokane. Do. And Casey, what's your story with astrology?
I've probably been a serious student for about 2 years now, but yeah, I'm still learning.
So am I.
And
Yeah, when you stop learning, you die. Yeah, that's the way it works. All right. What's that? Oh. Yeah, they say that when you get old, you stop playing, but I think that's exactly opposite. I think that when you stop playing, you get old. And the same, I think, is true with learning. So when we look at Casey's chart, we see something, every chart is different. When you look at this chart, what's the first thing you see? Anyone?
I
don't know what anyone said, but you're all right. And I heard someone say Pluto on the ascendant, but I would actually say Saturn, Mars, Pluto, Jupiter all clustered around the ascendant, with Pluto perhaps the closest to the ascendant, but with the moon very, very close to the opposite point of Saturn and Mars. Now, here's a little tricky thing that's a really good, a simple example of something that's a lot more complicated that any realist is going to focus on and learn how to recognize. And it's this: any pair of planets has a point that's exactly halfway between them, called the midpoint. Wonder who thought of that. And the midpoint of any two planets functions like a point, like a planet was there that brings in those two planets together. And it turns out that in Casey's chart, the moon at 17, I'm just going to round all of these off. So just for, simplicity here, the moon at 17 Aries is about 1 degree away from 1 degree away from Mars at 18. But the midpoint between Saturn and Mars, the halfway point between 16 and 18 is what? And it's actually a little bit higher than that. It's like about 17 and a half, because the 18 is actually almost 19, but we're just kind of ballparking all of this. But we could say that the midpoint between Saturn and Mars is 17 Libra, meaning that the moon's opposition to those 2 points is way stronger than it first seems. Do you understand what I'm saying? So what does that mean? Well, let's start off first and talk about what is Saturn, what is Mars, what is Pluto, and we already talked about Jupiter is excess or more. It's opportunity. But Mars is, I consider Mars how you drive your car of life. Meaning it's how you hit the accelerator pedal. It's how you go to wherever it is you're going. If you have Mars in Aries, you go first and then you think about if you're going to get there. If you have Mars in Taurus, you're a little more determined about how you're going to get to where you get to in life. If you have Mars in Gemini, you're ready to go pretty much anywhere. And whether you get there or not is not important. If you have Mars in Cancer, you might be more content to just stay home. If you have Mars in Leo, it's not about where you're going. It's about what the car is you're driving. It's about how you appear. It's about the presentation you make on your way to where you're going. If you have Mars in Virgo, you go pretty carefully. You maybe don't go until you've read your map or your GPS and you know what time you need to leave and how you're going to get there. And again, all of these are metaphors, you understand. Mars in Libra says, I'm going to go to where I'm going, but before I go, I want to make sure what's out there and what they're going to think about how I'm going and what I'm doing, because I don't want to go somewhere if the wind's blowing me this way. I want to go somewhere that's going to make sense with the wider picture. So Mars in Libra is always taking into consideration the other person or the circumstances. So there's this give and take of Mars. And Mars in Libra is exactly opposite where it's at home, which is in Aries. And so Mars in Libra is a bit, I don't want to say handicapped, but it has to be more clever because it can't just hit the gas pedal. It always has to think about where it's going. Meanwhile, the moon in Aries, opposite it, is always thinking about being there before it even goes. Because because Aries is spontaneous and it's impulsive, and the moon is how you feel. So we have Casey, who feels like she needs to respond in the moment with whatever she's feeling. And Mars in Libra wants to say, yeah, but what does this mean to the game of chess I'm playing? And then Saturn is right there next to Mars saying, don't you dare. Because Mars is the dad. Mars is the principal. Mars is the speed limit and the cop that stops you for speeding. Mars says, hit the gas pedal, and the policeman says, you were going too fast and I'm going to give you a ticket. And meanwhile, the Aries moon is saying, I don't give a fuck what you say. And okay, I'll just pay the ticket and I'll probably do it again. Is this sounding familiar to you? And tell us a little bit, how does that work for you?
Well, I have a temper. I like the speed and drive fast, but I also have a part of me that is always hesitant, always paying attention to what other people think and what they'll do with the law.
Okay, so I'm going to cut you off only because online they can't hear you, but I want to say that what Casey said, that there's a bit of a temper. That's the planets in Aries or the moon in Aries. But it always has to be balanced by what's going on out there. And in a way that Mars and Saturn so close together is like driving a car that when you hit the gas, the brake goes down at the same time. When you hit the brake, the gas goes down at that same time. And so sometimes then there's an unevenness of what you do and what you don't do, how you go forward, how you don't go forward. And then into that mix, we have Pluto on the ascendant, which makes it so that I would imagine other people think that you're more intense than you really feel you are.
Yeah.
Because the ascendant is how we seem to other people. It's how our energy comes off. And Pluto being the planet of hidden power, and in some ways, it almost becomes like the what you don't say and the temper that you don't have is more of your secret weapon, more of your power tool than you're getting angry. That it's in some ways, this is the, yes, I get angry, and yet I'm better at getting even. So that's how I kind of see the beginnings of all of that. Now, the other piece in this is that your Venus in Gemini is really sweet, because in Gemini, Venus likes anything, everything. You know, it's adaptable, and it's more intellectual and more a love of words and ideas and communication. And it's harmonized. That's that blue line. It's a trine to, in particular, those planets in mid-Libra, all of them. And so in some way, those Venus planets the Libra planets for you, because Venus is the planet that's associated with Libra. Venus is important, and your Venus in Gemini kind of adds to a bit of a detachment sometimes from what's going on. I say detachment, not non-involvement. It's just that you can be angry, but kind of still be a bit emotionally detached so that you can be logical and use your reason to figure out what to do. Except what suffers in all of that is you. And what I mean by that is that hidden behind all of this that we haven't really talked about, but high in the sky, you were born at 1:30 in the afternoon. The sun in Cancer is about self-protection. Cancer is about our feelings that we don't necessarily express, or that we express when we really feel safe. And I would imagine with your chart, it's real important for you to have friends or to be around people with whom you feel safe, so that you can then express your vulnerability. But as soon as you're unsafe, that Cancer moon goes, nope, no one's home. How do you feel? I feel fine. Go, no, what's going on? No, nothing. I thought you were going to say something. No. But once you feel safe, then it's like, what's going on? And you can't shut her up. But it's like two different things. Does that make sense to you a bit?
Yeah, especially that last part that resonated way too closely, the shutting down and opening up.
So in some ways, my chart, although every other thing is different, I have an Aries Cancer thing like you do. Your moon is in Aries, my sun is in Aries. Your sun is in Cancer, my moon is in Cancer. It's a dilemma between what you feel on the inside and what you're experiencing on the outside. And it's almost like you go through life as I go through life, even when I'm having a good time, even when everything is fine, there's always two things going on, that out there and that in here. And anyone who's born with the sun and the moon in the same sign, Emilie, where's Emilie? You have the sun and the moon in Libra. You might be thinking, well, how can anyone feel one thing and be in something else? Because your sun and moon are in the same place. Whereas Casey and I, our suns and moons couldn't be more different. One's fiery and reactive, and the other is watery and more receptive. And so that becomes just an ongoing dance you dance of, again, it goes back to the when do you hit the gas, when do you hit the brake? When do you go forward, when do you stay home? And and I would imagine that the beginnings of the COVID period of time, or the quarantine period, when we had Saturn and Pluto both at about 20 degrees, 21, 22 degrees of Capricorn, those planets together were opposite your sun in Cancer, and 90 degrees or square. I imagine even in the months before, the end of 2019, that there was already struggle and dilemma going on in your life, that whatever happened in January, February, March of 2020 just doubled or tripled down on whatever was already kind of problematic. And let the jury note that the witness did that funny earthling thing of looking up in the sky and then looking down and looking up and looking down. Yes. Okay. All right. That's enough. Let's do one more real quickly. Thank you. Thank you, Casey. I have Kelsey. We have Casey and Kelsey. Where?
Can I just say that the three of us during the break all had a conversation about our Libra placements, which is really strange.
No, you can't. All right, go ahead, say it.
Well, actually, it's the person that I met at your talk at the beginning of the month. We discovered that she is a Libra new moon on the Libra full moon, both ruled by Venus and Virgo, and both Scorpio and Mercury, so let's make it weirder. And I just met Casey.
And that's 10:30 p.m. And you were born in the land of Cleve. What did I do? Is that right? Yeah. So, yeah, here is it. Does this look like your chart? 19 degrees Gemini rising, close enough? All right. So, first of all, again, you can see how the patterns are different in every chart we look at. And there's something about just the shape of the energy that is often a place to jump into, because it's really the geometry of how we're glued together. So Casey is a lot of Libra with an Aries moon. Emilie is a lot of Libra with a Libra moon. And Kelsey is a lot of Libra with an Aries moon. But there's no planets in Cancer. Instead, the planets 90 degrees to the Libra and Aries stuff is Uranus and Neptune at 18 degrees. In 1993-94, there was a once every 100, and I think maybe 120, 30 year conjunction of Uranus catching up to Neptune, which was definitive of that period of time. The thing that I notice here, aside, and actually you were technically born like a day after the full moon, because if it was an exact full moon, the moon would be at 8 degrees of Aries. And so instead of 8 degrees, it's 8 plus 15 degrees roughly, which means that you were born about 30 hours after the full moon technically, but still by sign, it's still Libra Aries. And that full moon is very closely opposed to Jupiter. And so we can see again that there's something here about overindulgence or too much or making things into more than they are, or maybe just being a positive and opportunity oriented person. But the problem being that Uranus and Neptune are 90 degrees to them. Oh, and then we have another issue, and that is that although Saturn is harmonized with your moon, Saturn high on the chart, this is the go-getter who's going to find a mountain and climb it and get to the top of something, have a real purpose in life. Do you have a real purpose in life?
Yes.
What is it?
Astrology.
Aha, well, even better. But that Saturn in Aquarius at the very top of the chart, and then the Saturn return probably back maybe 92, 93, I'm sorry, around 2022, 23, when Saturn first returned to where it was when you were born, may have been the ending of one road and the beginning of the road that you're now on. But the thing is that Saturn is 90 degrees to Pluto, that fat red line. And your chart it's interesting because there is some flow to various planets, but there's also quite a bit of stress, which again, I think of my personal trainer who always says no pain, no gain, which I don't always agree with. I have to believe that there is gain without pain. But it's the idea, and my chart also has like a lot of those red lines, that without conflict, there's no reason to resolve that and be creative and have forward movement. And so in traditional astrology, that you saw the blue lines, the trines and sextiles, they were considered to be magical. They were good, whereas the squares were in traditional astrology considered to often be afflictions. That's the word that they used. And yet we moderners who understand the nature of psychodynamic development know that without the stress or the conflict that is created on some sort of psychic level, there's no reason to do something about it and move forward. And so in your chart, the exacerbating factor is that spiritual, creative, imaginative Neptune in grounded Capricorn lined up with Uranus that wants everything right now. There's that sense of instantaneity. It's when the lightning strikes, the only moment there is this moment. And your chart has some of that, especially with the moon in Aries. But different than the other charts that we looked at, you have Mars in Scorpio, and Mercury is lined up with Mars, which suggests to me, there's too many Kelsey's, Kelsey's chart. You had a Mercury in Scorpio also, right? Or was that Kelsey? Or was that Emilie? Emilie. All right. So the Scorpio is the part that can dig deep. And with Mars and Mercury together, it's like you're someone that goes places that the lighthearted don't, and it probably in some ways, your Gemini rising, which in the spirit of full astrological disclosure, I am leasing one of those for this body for my life too. The Gemini rising in your chart, I imagine you use similarly to the way I use mine. And that is, it's a good way to keep everyone at a distance because they think you're smart and clever and lighthearted when you want to be. But it's really just the way of not having to engage with the deeper, more intense Mars and Mercury in Scorpio, that even though they think they're having a light conversation with you, you've tuned into their jugular vein and know exactly everything about every aspect of their physical, metaphysical, spiritual, and emotional life. And they don't have a clue. They just think you're telling stories. So does that make sense a little bit? Oh, yeah. That wasn't just a yes. That was an oh, yeah. Oh, and we have another Venus in Virgo. Venus in Virgo is the list maker. Meet someone, do I like this person? Well, let's see. They do this, yep, they do that, they don't do that, they don't do that. Do I have more yeses or nos? It's about, no, there's more yeses, okay, I'm in. There's that sense of wanting to use critical analysis to separate out the wheat from the chaff, which is the symbol of Virgo, is the virgin, the unowned woman, holding wheat, which then, this is good, I'll eat it, this is crap, I'm gonna throw it away. And so there's that sense of Venus in Virgo being that energy also. Now, when it comes to transits or transitions, I think the most important thing to understand is that you are at a point in your life, and have been for a couple of years since your Saturn return, that in some ways you've already reached the place where you needed to be. And even though you're going somewhere, you're really consolidating the energy that you've gained, getting ready for when Saturn, about maybe 6-7 years down the road, when Saturn reaches your ascendant, then you'll be popped into a new phase. And it's not about climbing the ladder that you're on higher. It's about consolidating the footing that you've gained at where you are already, so that it's like, I consider it to be like building a tree house on the branch of the tree that you've climbed, because you can't climb any higher because you've already reached the top of that ladder that you've climbed on. And I think that that's an important piece of what's going on in your chart in a large sense. And the other thing is that as Saturn is moving through Pisces, through your 10th house of career and the mission in your life, it's also been moving opposite Venus. So it may, on some level, feel like the money and sweetness and love that you want may feel a little bit farther away than you would like. And there just may be a sense of awareness of what you need to do to get to where you're going versus the pleasure of actually being there. And I don't know if that makes sense to you at all. I know that's stated kind of in general terms, but I try to keep it that way when in a group like this. Does that make sense a little bit? You want to say anything about it? You could say no.
Sure. Finances have definitely been on my mind, and, you know, starting an astrology practice and the efforts that takes to get going to be financially sustainable with that house being activated. Definitely aligned.
Got it. Thank you. I would also suggest that now that Jupiter has moved into Gemini, where it's going to go over your nodes, it's moving through this 12th house and heading toward your ascendant. But as it does, it's going to harmonize. It's going to make trines with your sun, and then eventually with Jupiter and with Saturn. I'm thinking that as this year progresses, the opportunities from the seeds that you're planting that may be invisible even to yourself, but certainly to others, will, as Jupiter moves towards your ascendant over it, back and forth over it, through 2024 into early 2025, is really going to bring some opportunity to your life. At least that's my sense. So that's it. Any feedback, any questions, anything you want to ask before we bail?
I'll just note, because I think it's interesting transit-wise, I have Saturn conjunct my midheaven in
Yes.
full sign, and the day that Saturn went into Aquarius, I lost my job. I was laid off with COVID. That's extremely.
Got it. And so that Saturn return, while Saturn is conjunct your midheaven. By the way, Kelsey said in whole sign houses, there's various ways of mapping the dividing lines between the houses. And I've gone on record many times, and I will again right now, that if there weren't 20 or more different house cusp systems, let me say it this way, if any of them worked, there wouldn't be so many systems in widespread use. And I don't care what house cusp system you work with, the things that do not change system from system are the ascendant and descendant, and the midheaven and the opposite point, the medium celli, the middle of the heavens, and the imum celli, the bottom of the heavens. They don't change. So whether you said in whole sign houses, Saturn was conjunct my midheaven, in any system, your Saturn is conjunct your midheaven. And when Saturn on the midheaven had Saturn come around and touch that point at your Saturn return, and you lost a job, that was what I was talking about earlier. That's the ladder running out of rungs. You can't continue on that path anymore. It's the universe saying the path's ended. You need to pull in, get real, make a new path, and figure out what you're doing. But you're not going on that path anymore. You're now consolidating your energy and getting ready for a path that has not yet unfolded for you, even though you might in your mind have an idea of what that might be in the future. Does that make sense? Can I go home now? That's it. Thank you all, both here and for your patience, for those of you who are online and dealt with our weird tech stuff that somehow never seems to go away. And I think what we need to do is get out of here without it being a fire drill and needing to leave right away. we're going to end the live stream. Can you do that for me, Sam? And we're going to help them here by those of you who want to help fold chairs and make it easier for them to leave and close up. We've stayed well beyond our normal welcome moment. And I'll see you next month. I will be back on the first Friday of the month, actually in July, August, September, and October. Actually, July, yeah, all those months I will be here on the first Friday of the month. And so that's it. Thank you all and have a good month.
Thank you. Yay.